The year was 1873, and the United States was a very different place. Just a decade earlier, the Civil War had ended in a stalemate, with the Confederacy retaining its independence and becoming a separate nation. It was a bitter pill for many in the North to swallow, but they had no choice but to accept it. The newly formed Confederate States of America were a strange and unsettling place. Slavery was still legal, and the economy was based on the labor of millions of enslaved people. But there was something else, too, something that seemed to seep into the very soil and air of the Confederate States. It was a feeling of unease, of darkness, of something lurking just beneath the surface. People whispered about it in hushed tones, but no one dared speak too openly. They knew that the wrong word could get them into trouble. In the small town of Crossroads, Georgia, a young woman named Mary had just moved with her family. Her father was a former Union soldier who had lost his leg in the war, and he had decided that the only way to make a living was to move to the South and start over. At first, things seemed normal enough. Mary made friends with the local girls, went to church on Sundays, and helped her mother with the cooking and cleaning. But as time went on, she began to notice something strange. It started with small things, a rustling in the bushes when there was no wind, a shadow moving across her bedroom wall at night. Mary tried to ignore it, but the feeling of unease grew stronger every day. One evening, Mary was walking home from a friend's house when she heard a strange noise behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. She started walking faster, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She screamed and spun around, but there was no one there. She looked down and saw that her shadow had become twisted and distorted, as if it belonged to someone, or something else. Mary ran all the way home, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She burst through the front door and collapsed onto the couch, trembling. Her mother came running in, concern etched on her face.
Mary, what's wrong? Are you hurt?
Mary tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She pointed at the shadow on the wall, which had followed her inside. Her mother looked at it, then back at Mary.
It's just a shadow, dear.
She said, patting Mary's arm.
You're just tired and overworked. You need some rest.
But Mary knew it wasn't just her imagination. Something was happening in Crossroads, something dark and sinister. She couldn't explain it, but she knew it was real. As the days went by, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Mary started having nightmares, dreams of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her room, of twisted hands reaching out to grab her. She would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. One night, Mary decided she had had enough. She couldn't take it anymore. She got out of bed and walked out of the house, into the dark and silent streets of Crossroads. As she walked, she felt a strange sensation, as if something was drawing her towards a particular spot. She walked faster, her heart pounding in her chest. She arrived at an old, abandoned plantation house on the outskirts of town. The house was dark and silent, but Mary could feel something inside, something dark and malevolent. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Inside the abandoned plantation house, Mary could feel the presence of something sinister. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the faint glow of a strange light illuminated the hallway. As she moved deeper into the house, she could hear whispers and faint, ghostly moans that made her skin crawl. Mary was paralyzed with fear, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. As she reached the end of the hallway, she saw a large room with a door slightly ajar. Inside, she saw a figure moving in the shadows. Trembling with fear, Mary pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with an eerie green glow emanating from a strange object in the center of the room. The object was a large crystal, pulsing with a strange energy that seemed to warp the very air around it. The figure moved towards her, revealing itself to be a twisted, demonic creature with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. Mary tried to run, but the creature was too fast. It grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. The creature spoke in a language she didn't understand, its voice deep and guttural. It seemed to be communicating with the crystal, and as it did, Mary felt a strange force pulling at her mind. She tried to resist, but it was no use. The crystal was drawing her closer, and as she reached out to touch it, everything went black. When Mary woke up, she was lying on the floor of the plantation house. The crystal was gone, and the creature was nowhere to be seen. She stumbled outside, feeling weak and disoriented. As she emerged into the sunlight, Mary saw that something had changed. The sky was a sickly shade of green, and the trees were twisted and deformed. The air was thick with the stench of decay and death. Mary realized with horror that she had been transported to an alternate dimension, a world ruled by dark forces beyond her understanding. She was trapped in a nightmare, with no hope of escape. Days turned into weeks, and Mary wandered through the strange, twisted landscape, living off of whatever scraps she could find. She encountered other survivors, but they were all broken and twisted by the horrors of this world. They whispered of a great evil that had taken over the world, a force that could not be stopped. Mary knew that she had to find a way to escape this nightmare, to find her way back to her own world. But with each passing day, her hope dwindled. In the end, Mary was consumed by the darkness. She became a creature of the night, haunting the twisted landscape of the alternate dimension, a dark and terrible force in her own right. And as the years turned into centuries, Mary's legend grew. She became known as the Queen of the Shadowlands, a powerful sorceress with the ability to control the very fabric of reality. But deep down, Mary knew the truth. She was a prisoner in this twisted world, a victim of a force beyond her understanding. And even in death, she could never escape the horror that had consumed her soul.